Story 1. The ghostly shipwrecks of the Bermuda Triangle before modern science. You might already have heard whispers about a vast expanse of ocean in the Atlantic, roughly bounded by Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. It is a place that seafarers have always regarded with a mix of awe, curiosity, and quiet unease. Today, it carries the dramatic label of the Bermuda Triangle. But before the age of sensational headlines and conspiracy theories, it was simply part of the routine charts that every merchant ship and naval vessel followed on their long transatlantic journeys. What is fascinating, however, is that even in those early years, long before modern technology and widespread reporting, the waters of this region were quietly gathering a series of unexplained disappearances that would later become legendary. Imagine yourself on a wooden merchant vessel in the early 18th century, somewhere near the subtropical waters of the Atlantic. The horizon is pale, and the sun hangs low in a sky the color of bleached linen. The sea is deceptively calm, shimmering with quiet ripples. For days, the crew has been scanning the endless blue, noting the occasional shift in currents or the distant shadow of another sail. The only sign that civilization still exists beyond these waters. Then, without warning, a ship in the convoy disappears, vanishing seemingly into thin air. No storm, no warning, no debris left behind. In historical records, these vanishings are usually described in simple, matter-of-fact logs. Ship not sighted, crew missing, search conducted, results none. The dry nature of these entries belies the eerie mystery that hung over the crew, quietly unsettling them in a way that words rarely capture. Among the first documented disappearances that we can trace occurred in the early 1700s. One merchant ship, en route from the bustling Caribbean ports to London, carried a hold full of sugar, spices, and exotic hardwoods goods that were both valuable and mundane in the rhythm of maritime trade. Its captain, an experienced sailor who had navigated these waters many times before, left detailed records in his journal. He noted the behavior of the currents, the trade winds, and even peculiar sightings. Strange, phosphorescent lights under the water, swirling currents that seemed almost purposeful, and fleeting shadows that moved beneath the hull. Yet, on a clear day, the ship simply did not arrive at its scheduled port. Investigators later found no wreckage, no signs of struggle, only the faint echo of the ship's last recorded position in the logs. It is these understated notes, so calmly recorded by sailors accustomed to danger, that give the early Bermuda Triangle its hauntingly boring horror. The sense that the sea quietly claimed entire lives and vessels without fanfare, leaving only the subtle traces in paperwork for history to quietly remark upon. The region's treacherous reputation began to accumulate slowly in whispers and official correspondences. Naval records from the 18th century often list vessels lost with all hands, yet the entries provide no dramatic narrative, no speculation about storms or pirates, only the acknowledgement of absence. One particularly unsettling case involved a small convoy of schooners tasked with transporting supplies from Havana to the American colonies. On a routine morning, the leading vessel noted a change in wind direction that was unusual for that season. The men observed a strange calm in the air, almost like the atmosphere itself had paused. Over the next 24 hours, one by one, the schooners fell out of sight. No distress signals were sent, no wreckage was found, and the logs simply ended with the final entries, the last coordinates, and a note that they had lost contact. For modern historians, the dry phrasing hides an undercurrent of dread, the realization that vast stretches of the Atlantic had claimed these lives silently and efficiently, leaving the world to slowly notice their absence. By the 19th century, as steamships began to replace sail, the pattern of disappearances continued. These vessels were larger, sturdier, and equipped with more precise navigational tools. Yet the region still managed to confound even the most experienced crews. One of the more curious entries comes from a steamship that was carrying coal from Charleston to Bermuda. The ship left port with a heavy fog rolling across the harbor. For 2 days, the fog lifted and settled like a slow-moving blanket. On the 3rd day, the captain recorded, with almost casual unease, that the compass needle seemed to sway without reason, and the ocean currents moved in contradictory patterns. He noted the crew's nervous glances toward the mist, though nothing had yet occurred. And yet, within hours, the vessel was gone, leaving behind only the fog and the faint memory of its route in maritime logs. There were no survivors, no wreckage, and the authorities at the time simply recorded the event as a loss at sea, a notation devoid of horror, yet profoundly unsettling. Part of what makes these early Bermuda Triangle events so quietly eerie is the combination of human expectation and natural unpredictability. Sailors were, after all, highly experienced in navigating the Atlantic. They understood storms, shoals, and the often capricious temperament of the ocean. But in these cases, everything appeared normal, almost trivially ordinary, until the moment of disappearance. The events lacked dramatic struggle. They lacked desperate letters or frantic last entries. Instead, there is a monotony to the records, a repetition of coordinates, dates, and names, punctuated by the absence of the very ships that should have been there. It is in this quiet, almost bureaucratic documentation that the true horror resides, not in gruesome spectacle, but in the inexplicable erasure of life and evidence, leaving only the ordinary details as testimony to extraordinary events. As you imagine the scene, picture the crews on these vessels, their daily routines filled with chores that would seem mundane today. They haul ropes, scrub decks, check sails, and record the weather, all while keeping a careful eye on the horizon. They experience moments of beauty and calma, sunrise casting golden light across gentle waves, the rhythmic splash of water against the hull butt. These moments coexist with the latent threat of sudden disappearance. And in many cases, that threat becomes reality without warning. It is the quiet tension between routine and catastrophe that makes these historical records fascinating. They remind us that life at sea was never just about survival. It was about maintaining calm in the face of forces that could erase you without a trace. And that historical documentation can feel both mundane and ghostly at the same time. Interestingly, some early sailors attempted to rationalize the disappearances with natural explanations, long before the idea of a Bermuda Triangle existed in popular culture. Sudden storms, rogue waves, shifting magnetic fields, and undersea currents were all suggested as causes. Yet these explanations often failed to account for the sheer number of cases or the lack of debris that should have accompanied a sunken vessel. Scientists of the era recorded these occurrences with a mixture of curiosity and resignation, noting them as anomalies in an otherwise predictable ocean. And yet, despite the calm, methodical language used in reports, one cannot help but feel a subtle chill, a realization that the Atlantic, vast and indifferent, has long possessed areas where human comprehension and expectation quietly fail. In sum, the early history of the Bermuda Triangle is less a story of dramatic explosions or horrifying monsters and more a slow, accumulating tension. It is a story told through logs, routine observations, and the faint, almost imperceptible traces left behind by vanished ships. It is the kind of horror that does not scream, it whispers. It manifests in the ordinary, the careful recording of coordinates, the noting of slight deviations in wind or current, the unremarkable yet haunting acknowledgement that a vessel has simply ceased to exist. And as you drift in thought over these quiet tragedies, you are left with a question that sailors of the past might have pondered in solitude. As they gazed over the unending waves, in a place where the ocean keeps its secrets so thoroughly, what else might remain? Hidden beneath the calm surface, waiting for the next ship to sail unknowingly into the unknown. And so, as you prepare to consider what happened to the next vessel, or the patterns that emerged over decades of vanished ships, one cannot help but wonder, what is it about this stretch of ocean that makes routine journeys so quietly perilous? And why did some ships vanish while others passed safely through? As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the Atlantic continued to claim its victims in the Bermuda Triangle, leaving behind a patchwork of incomplete records, whispered stories, and quiet, unresolved mysteries. For sailors navigating these waters, the ocean became less a predictable expanse of currents and trade winds, and more a silent stage for inexplicable events. While Section 1 introduced you to the calm, bureaucratic eeriness of vanished ships, now you will meet some of the vessels themselves, along with the accounts of those who survived or nearly did. One of the earliest detailed accounts comes from the small brigantine Sea Wren, a vessel bound for Havana with a modest cargo of sugar, molasses, and a few barrels of rum. The captain, Jonathan Phillips, was meticulous in his log-keeping, noting the crew's routine and the daily weather. On June 3, 1792, he wrote of an unusual phenomenon. The horizon appeared warped, as if the distance between him and the approaching cloud banks had stretched. He described the water as unusually still, yet restless, noting that the waves moved in irregular patterns that seemed contrary to the prevailing wind. The sailors, who had long accepted minor oddities as part of life at sea, felt a quiet unease. 2 days later, Sea Wren disappeared entirely. No debris, no survivors, only the faint trace of its last coordinates in Phillips' final entry. In other cases, the disappearance was even more peculiar because the ship was never in apparent danger at all. Take the story of the schooner Catherine Ann, which departed from Charleston in 1818 for a routine voyage to Bermuda. Her captain, William Harris, wrote that the voyage began normally. The crew went about their daily tasks, hauling sails, checking supplies, polishing brass fixtures, and marking the position of the sun to confirm latitude. One night, as they sailed under a clear, star-studded sky, Harris recorded in his journal that the compasses appeared to waver and the stars seemed to flicker unnaturally. Though calm prevailed over the water, a sense of oddity settled over the crew. By morning, the ship had vanished without trace. Later reports from passing vessels recorded only the faint smell of salt and coal in the air, as if Catherine Ann had left a ghostly echo behind. The records describe the event without dramatization, leaving historians and maritime enthusiasts alike to wrestle with the silent questions that such disappearances provoke. Some of the most striking early accounts come from naval vessels. The British Royal Navy, in particular, had detailed logbooks and extensive records of every journey. One entry from 1823 concerning the frigate HMS Ilarion reads almost clinically, "Ship departed from Bermuda at 0600 hours. Visibility excellent. Crew in usual health. By 1800 hours, vessel no longer visible. No distress noted. All search attempts unfruitful." Here again, the understated reporting is what makes the disappearance unsettling. There is no storm to blame, no pirate attack, only the quiet erasure of a ship and its crew from history. For officers like Captain Edward Mulligan, who later wrote reflections on the event, the unanswered question of why such a skilled crew and well-maintained ship could vanish without warning lingered like a subtle, unresolved chord in a long melody. While official records provide a skeleton of events, personal accounts letters, diaries, and oral reports for the flesh, though often in fragmented and cryptic form. Families of missing sailors sometimes received letters describing strange occurrences in the weeks before a ship's disappearance. One widow in Charleston recalled a letter from her husband describing glowing lights beneath the waves, strange currents that tugged at the rudder even in calm conditions, and the peculiar sensation that the sea itself seemed alive. Many dismissed these observations as exaggerations or the natural anxiety of life at sea, but when paired with official records of lost ships, they hint at patterns that remain difficult to explain. In these quiet, mundane details, you can sense the subtle horror of the Bermuda Triangle, the ordinary lives of sailors intersecting with forces they could neither predict nor understand. By the mid-19th century, more systematic record-keeping helped to trace patterns of these disappearances, though still without concrete explanations. Vessels often vanished along consistent routes, particularly those between Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, suggesting that the region's unique geography and currents might play a role. Scientists of the era speculated about sudden storms, rogue waves, and even shifting magnetic anomalies that could interfere with compasses. Yet these rational theories failed to account for the sheer number of cases, or the absence of wreckage that should have followed a ship lost to the sea. Some sailors began to tell stories quietly, almost conspiratorially, about ghost waters where ships disappeared as if swallowed by some imperceptible void. In the logs, these notes were recorded in a detached, factual tone. But the stories that circulated among crews were tinged with unease and a muted awe for the power of the Atlantic. Interestingly, some vessels did survive encounters with strange phenomena, though only partially. In 1849, the merchant ship Adelaide reported an inexplicable fog that seemed to cling to the vessel in patches, moving independently of wind or current. The crew described compass needles spinning erratically and the water glowing with an unnatural luminescence at night. Despite their fear, the ship eventually emerged from the fog and reached its port safely, leaving behind only an anxious log entry and whispered tales among sailors. These accounts demonstrate the capricious nature of the triangle. Some ships vanished entirely, while others seemed to flirt with the boundary between survival and disappearance. It is a quiet, almost tedious suspense, but in its accumulation, it becomes profoundly unsettling. The human dimension of these events adds further depth. The repetitive routines of life at sea, the hauling of ropes, the constant monitoring of weather, the endless maintenance of sails and rigging contrast sharply with the sudden, inexplicable vanishings. For the sailors, life was monotonous yet disciplined, punctuated by these moments of incomprehensible uncertainty. Imagine standing on deck, scrubbing the wooden planks under a blazing sun, only to notice that the horizon seems wrong, slightly distorted. You glance around at your crewmates, each immersed in their tasks, unaware of the subtle signals that the ocean may already be preparing to reclaim its due. The blend of ordinary life and extraordinary, unexplained disappearance is at the heart of the Bermuda Triangle's eerie charm. It is horror, but of a quiet, understated, and thoroughly boring variety. Finally, it is worth noting that some of the early disappearances may never have been fully documented. Records were lost, destroyed, or never created, particularly for smaller vessels and privately owned ships. Historians can only piece together the mosaic from fragments, log entries, letters, insurance claims, and oral traditions. These gaps in the historical record amplify the haunting quality of the Triangle. Where one ship vanished in full view of its convoy, another simply disappears without a trace in unremarkable circumstances, leaving us to speculate about the countless undocumented events. The combination of meticulous documentation and invisible erasure creates a tension that is difficult to shake. The ocean is indifferent, yet it keeps meticulous, invisible records of what it claims. As you absorb these accounts, the pattern begins to emerge. The Bermuda Triangle is a place where ordinary maritime life and extraordinary disappearance intersect. It is not always dramatic, it is not always violent. Sometimes, the horror lies simply in the quiet, bureaucratic recording of absence, in the meticulous noting of a ship's final coordinates, and in the faint, lingering impression left behind by vessels that ceased to exist. And as you contemplate these vanished ships, the Sea Wren, the Catherine Anne, the HMS Ilarion, and countless others, you are left with the question that haunted sailors for centuries. Why does this stretch of ocean claim some vessels while sparing others? And what hidden force lies beneath its deceptively calm surface? By the late 19th century, the Bermuda Triangle had quietly accrued a long record of vanished ships, each disappearance adding a new layer to the mystery. While the early records were sparse and clinical, the accumulated evidence began to hint at patterns that were both fascinating and unsettling. Historians and sailors alike noticed that disappearances were concentrated along certain routes, particularly between Bermuda, Miami, and Puerto Rico, suggesting a combination of natural and inexplicable factors at work. Yet, despite meticulous observation, no single explanation could account for the disappearances entirely. This pattern of calm, repetitive, and unresolved loss forms the core of the Triangle's quiet horror, a place where the ordinary routines of seafaring life collided with forces that remained frustratingly beyond comprehension. One notable case from this era involved the schooner Mary Celeste. Although slightly outside the classic Triangle boundaries, its story captures the eerie tone of vanished vessels. In 1872, she was found adrift near the Azores, with no one aboard. Her cargo was largely intact, provisions remained untouched, and there was no sign of struggle or disaster. Logs and notes showed that the crew had been performing their usual tasks before disappearing without trace, while not strictly within the Triangle. Cases like this exemplified the same unsettling phenomena experienced in the Bermuda region, the sudden, inexplicable erasure of human activity against the backdrop of an otherwise ordinary sea. Ships could vanish in perfect weather, under normal routine, with everything in place, creating a type of horror that was profoundly understated, yet deeply unnerving. Closer, to the triangle itself, additional disappearances reinforced this quiet menace. The steamship Carib Queen, a moderately sized passenger vessel, was lost in 1891 while transporting a small group of passengers and mail from Havana to Miami. The ship's captain, a seasoned navigator, recorded no unusual weather and observed only minor discrepancies in compass readings. A detail he noted without alarm. By the next day, the vessel had vanished entirely, leaving behind no wreckage and only the faintest reports of sightings by other ships several miles away. Observers later noted strange lights in the water, seemingly moving independently of the currents. But these observations were fleeting and inconsistent. Historians have speculated on natural explanations, including sudden whirlpools, rogue waves, or magnetic anomalies, but the records themselves, detached, brief, and methodically, leave a sense of unresolved dread that no scientific theory can fully dispel. It is important to remember that life aboard these vessels was ordinary and painstakingly routine. Crews performed meticulous tasks maintaining the rigging, navigating by charts, observing the weather, and keeping detailed logs. Yet, within this monotony, the ocean silently imposed its unpredictable will. For sailors, the blend of ordinary work and extraordinary disappearance created a unique tension. Every routine task could be the last. Every mundane observation potentially the final record before vanishing. One can almost hear the quiet tick of the chronometers and the faint scratch of quills on paper as each captain documented the last known details of their ship, unaware that these simple notes would become some of the only evidence of lives quietly erased by the Atlantic. Natural explanations for these disappearances were plentiful, yet insufficient. Researchers of the era considered sudden squalls, uncharted reefs, magnetic disturbances, and oceanic whirlpools. While these phenomena undoubtedly occurred, they could not account for the complete lack of debris or the apparent randomness of which ships vanished and which passed through safely. Some early sailors speculated that certain areas of the triangle were cursed or inhabited by spirits, a notion that circulated quietly among crews as whispered warnings rather than public statements. These theories, though scientifically ungrounded, highlight the human need to find patterns or causation in situations where the ocean offered none. The quiet horror of the Bermuda Triangle lies not in the drama of storms or explosions, but in the absence of explanation, leaving both historical observers and modern historians with a lingering sense of unease. By the turn of the 20th century, technological advancements such as steam, propulsion, and more precise navigation did little to reduce the region's strange reputation. Ships continued to disappear under circumstances that, by all measurable standards, should have guaranteed safety. Logs from the period consistently show calm, routine operations, followed by abrupt, unexplained cessation of records. One particularly striking example involves the cargo ship SS Wanderer, which vanished en route from Puerto Rico to New York in 1904. The vessel S-log recorded the crew's daily duties, meals, and navigational observations without a hint of alarm. When communication ceased, authorities conducted thorough searches, yet discovered no trace of the ship, cargo, or crew. The only record remaining was the systematic documentation of its departure and the abrupt ending of entries, an ordinary chain of words that now serves as a chilling historical echo. While individual stories are compelling, the cumulative effect is even more striking. Across decades, patterns emerge of calm seas, routine activity, and sudden disappearance. Ships vanish without storm, struggle, or wreckage. The survivors, rare as they are often, recount strange fogs, flickering lights, and inexplicable changes in the behavior of water and compasses. Families and maritime authorities documented these events in meticulous detail. Yet, despite all evidence, no single cause emerged. For historians, the Bermuda Triangle represents a convergence of the ordinary and the extraordinary, the disciplined, repetitive work of seafaring life intersecting with the ocean's vast, indifferent, and occasionally inexplicable power. What is also noteworthy is the quiet resilience of maritime culture in response to these events. Sailors adapted their routes, developed cautious observational practices, and maintained detailed logs to track patterns. Yet the ocean's unpredictability remained. Generations of mariners grew up hearing stories of vanished ships and ghostly waters. Yet they continued their work, fully aware of the subtle dangers. It is this combination of human perseverance and silent peril that gives the Bermuda Triangle its unique character as a historical phenomenon. It is not filled with dramatic catastrophes, but with understated tension, routine bravery, and unresolved questions. The horror is never loud. It is the persistent whisper that the ocean might claim the next vessel as quietly as it claimed the last. In conclusion, the early disappearances of ships in the Bermuda Triangle form a tapestry of understated horror, meticulously recorded, yet largely unexplained. From the vanished Sea Wren to the Carib Queen and SS Wanderer, the stories reveal a consistent pattern. Calm seas, ordinary routines, and sudden erasure. The ocean, vast and indifferent, provided no spectacle, no warning, only the quiet removal of life and evidence. It is this quiet, procedural, almost bureaucratic nature of historical record-keeping that makes the Bermuda Triangle uniquely haunting. The horror is in the normalcy, the ordinary work of men and women aboard ships, vanishing in a place where the sea keeps its secrets with meticulous silence. And so, as we reflect on the patterns, theories, and legacies of these early disappearances, one cannot help but wonder, what lessons did sailors learn, if any, from centuries of quiet erasure? And could any of these vanishings have been avoided? Or were some ships always destined to disappear without a trace? Story 2. The Lost Flight of the Stardust. In the early hours of August 2nd, 1947, a small passenger aircraft named Stardust departed from Buenos Aires, Argentina, bound for Santiago, Chile. Its passengers were a quiet assortment of travelers, business people seeking meetings, families returning home, and a few solitary adventurers. On board, the routine of air travel mirrored the mundane yet essential order of seafaring life in centuries past. Crew members checked instruments, secured luggage, and ensured that engines operated within their normal parameters. In those pre-digital days, navigation relied heavily on compasses, maps, and the skill of pilots trained to interpret the sky, winds, and terrain. To all appearances, this would be another ordinary flight, a short journey across the South American Andes, a routine path taken many times before. However, the Stardust would never arrive at its destination. As the flight progressed, the weather over the Andes shifted subtly but significantly. Pilots noted cloud formations that appeared denser than expected for the season, yet nothing suggested imminent danger. The passengers, accustomed to routine aerial journeys, scarcely noticed the slow darkening of clouds that could have foreshadowed the unusual sequence of events. By mid-afternoon, radio contact became erratic. Reports from nearby airstrips noted the faint crackle of transmissions, often indecipherable, sometimes containing fragments of a single word repeated, stendic. No one could interpret it, and few could have predicted the ominous meaning it would later assume. The disappearance of the stardust was both sudden and silent. Modern readers may imagine catastrophic crashes accompanied by fiery spectacle, but in reality, the aircraft simply ceased to communicate and failed to arrive. Search parties scoured the Andes and surrounding valleys, yet initial efforts yielded nothing. Logbooks from the airline, preserved with meticulous care, revealed that the crew was experienced, the engines maintained, and the route routine. There was no storm reported severe enough to ground flights, no known mechanical failure, and no hint of sabotage. It is this ordinary veneer, juxtaposed with total disappearance, that casts a quiet, unsettling shadow over the event. Eyewitness accounts from later decades, though often fragmentary, provide subtle insights. In nearby villages, residents recalled seeing a small aircraft enter thick cloud banks over the mountains, only to vanish moments later. The clouds were heavy, but not violent. The air was calm, carrying the faint sound of engines until the aircraft disappeared from sight. Some villagers described unusual echoes, as if the engine's hum lingered unnaturally long in the valleys, a quiet, auditory ghost of a vessel no longer present. These subtle, almost imperceptible signs created the kind of understated horror that historians of disappearances often call the everyday uncanny. It was not the spectacle of fire or panic, but the quiet, bureaucratic fact of absence that unsettled both contemporary observers and later researchers. Efforts to locate the stardust were extensive. Ground teams traversed treacherous mountain passes, relying on maps, compasses, and local guides familiar with the terrain. Helicopters of the era were primitive by today's standards, incapable of the sweeping surveys modern aircraft could perform. Despite persistent searches, weeks passed with no trace. Airline administrators and government officials documented every lead, noting distances, possible crash sites, and fragmented reports from mountain dwellers. All official entries were remarkably calm, almost perfunctorily, noting the failure to locate the aircraft. Yet behind this procedural language was an implicit tension. An entire plane, complete with crew and passengers, had vanished without warning or apparent cause. In addition to bureaucratic accounts, private correspondences reveal the personal toll of the disappearance. Families of passengers wrote letters filled with tentative hope, seeking news of loved ones, analyzing the fragmentary reports of search parties, and clinging to faint clues. One letter mentions the perplexing radio transmissions heard before the disappearance. Stendic repeated without context. Recipients of such letters struggled to understand, interpreting the sequence in their own minds. Some imagined miscommunication, others a cryptic warning, and still others feared it was an early indication of the silent, ineffable force that sometimes claimed vessels, whether by land, sea, or air. The Stardust incident also highlights the limitations of mid-20th century navigation. Pilots relied on barometric altimeters, magnetic compasses, and visual cues. A small error in altitude or course, combined with sudden shifts in wind currents, could place a plane in a dangerous position without immediate awareness. Yet, even these plausible explanations cannot fully account for the total absence of wreckage reported during the initial searches. In the context of the Bermuda Triangle's broader history of disappearances, The stardust demonstrates a continuity of mystery. Skilled operators, functioning equipment, routine conditions, and sudden, inexplicable disappearance. It is a phenomenon that repeats across centuries, whether in wooden ships or early aircraft. Finally, the stardust underscores the human dimension of quiet horror. Its passengers were ordinary people engaged in ordinary activities, unaware that their journey would intersect with forces beyond comprehension. Their routine, mundane presence contrasts sharply with the extraordinary outcome, total erasure without spectacle. The quiet notes in airline records, the scattered eyewitness reports, and the persistent mystery all contribute to the understated terror of the event. Like vanished ships of earlier centuries, the stardust leaves a faint echo in historical documentation, a whisper of absence, a ghostly trace in logs and letters that quietly unsettles anyone who studies them. As you reflect on the stardust, the subtle patterns of the Bermuda Triangle begin to emerge once more. A combination of ordinary circumstances, routine human activity, and sudden, inexplicable disappearance. The quiet horror lies in the accumulation of these incidents, the way they repeatedly defy expectation, while remaining meticulously documented. And so one is left with the question that haunted both contemporaries and later historians. How could an aircraft, carefully operated and maintained, vanish in such a routine journey, and what unseen factors might the triangle harbor that continue to elude explanation? After the stardust failed to arrive in Santiago, the initial response was methodical, deliberate, and rooted in the aviation practices of the late 1940s. Officials from the airline quickly coordinated with local authorities in both Argentina and Chile, dispatching search parties to comb the likely flight paths over the Andes. Unlike modern rescue operations with GPS tracking, radar coverage, and satellite imaging, these early searches relied on maps, compasses, and teams of ground personnel traversing rugged terrain. Each team carried radios, lanterns, and basic supplies, often trekking for days at a time across narrow mountain passes, steep cliffs, and hidden valleys. The landscape itself was a formidable adversary. Dense cloud cover, sudden weather shifts, and treacherous footing made every mile a careful negotiation between progress and safety. Eyewitness accounts from nearby villages added a curious layer to the search. Locals reported hearing a plane pass overhead in the early morning hours of August 2nd, followed by an unnatural silence. Some described glimpsing a small aircraft emerging briefly from cloud banks before vanishing again. Others noted peculiar lights in the mountain's faint, flickering glows that did not correspond to fires or natural reflections. These reports were collected meticulously by search teams, though they were difficult to verify. Historians reviewing these accounts centuries later note the quiet eeriness of the testimonies. No panic, no cries, only subtle observations of anomalies in an otherwise ordinary day. It was as though the mountains themselves were holding the plane's presence in abeyance, leaving observers with only fragments of a larger, unresolved event. The search continued for weeks, following calculated flight corridors based on the stardust's last known coordinates and the airline's standard navigation routes. Helicopters were sent to hover above valleys, scanning for wreckage, while mountaineers and guides explored the ground below. Search parties meticulously noted every boulder, river, and cliff, cataloging potential hazards and cross-referencing them with the expected trajectory of the aircraft. Yet no definitive trace emerged. Each team returned with meticulous logs, documenting what they had seen and what they had not. In these dry records, the the quiet horror of the disappearance took shape. Extensive, methodical observation, producing no tangible evidence of the vanished plane. Meanwhile, the fragments of radio transmissions, including the mysterious Stendic message, captured public attention. The airline and investigators examined the recordings repeatedly, attempting to decipher the term or reconstruct the final moments of the flight. Theories ranged from scrambled Morse code to a mispronunciation of standard aviation procedures. Yet nothing definitively explained the content, timing, or context. The repetition of Stendic became an emblem of the inexplicable, a symbol of the silent, procedural horror that characterized the Bermuda Triangle's legacy. Unlike dramatic accounts of mechanical failure or visible catastrophe, this vanished communication left behind only ambiguity, ghostly echo preserved in logs, tapes, and the memories of those involved. As the weeks passed, the psychological weight of the search became apparent. Crews, accustomed to routine and disciplined observation, began to experience a subtle unease. Each day of fruitless exploration deepened the quiet tension, magnifying ordinary anomalies into significant omens. A faint glint of metal on a distant cliff face might signal hope or disappointment. Unusual patterns in cloud cover or wind direction were noted obsessively. The very ordinariness of these observations heightened their eerie quality, revealing the human tendency to seek pattern and meaning when confronted with persistent absence. In this sense, the horror of the Stardust disappearance was not only the physical vanishing of the aircraft, but also the quiet psychological impact on those charged with documenting its fate. Over the next several decades, the mystery of the Stardust persisted. Occasional reports of wreckage washed ashore or glimpsed from mountain passes remained inconclusive. Investigators revisited maps, recalculated flight paths, and examined weather records, hoping to reconstruct what had occurred. Some historians later speculated that the plane may have crashed on a hidden glacier or been obscured by a sudden landslide. Others posited that subtle errors in navigation, combined with rapidly shifting winds and cloud cover, could have guided the aircraft off course into terrain difficult to survey. Each theory, though plausible in part, left questions unresolved. Why had no debris been recovered promptly? And why did the initial communications hint at confusion without evident catastrophe? The accumulation of unanswered questions reinforced the quiet, persistent aura of unease surrounding the flight. The eventual discovery of wreckage, decades later, in 2000, provided partial resolution. Fragments of the Stardust were located high in the Andes, confirming that the plane had collided with terrain. Analysis revealed that navigational errors, combined with atmospheric phenomena affecting pilot perception, likely led to a controlled flight into terrain, a term now familiar in aviation safety, but almost unknowable to 1940s investigators. Yet, even this resolution retained a ghostly quality. The decades-long absence of evidence, the faint radio transmissions, and the silent valleys where the plane disappeared lent the event an enduring aura of mystery. The mountains had kept their secret for half a century, and the ordinary lives of passengers and crew remained suspended in the quiet limbo of history until the wreckage surfaced. The Stardust also reflects a broader theme within the Bermuda Triangle and related mysterious disappearances. The intersection of ordinary life with extraordinary events. Passengers followed predictable routines, reading, conversing, eating small meals, observing the clouds outside their windows. Crew members performed daily tasks with discipline and precision. unaware that these routines would abruptly intersect with a lethal combination of geography, weather, and navigational limitations. In this ordinary context, the extraordinary vanishing is rendered all the more subtle, almost mundane in the meticulousness of its documentation, yet profoundly unsettling in its consequences. As you imagine the search for the stardust, consider the patience, skill, and diligence required of those involved. They traversed difficult terrain, navigated treacherous weather, and catalogued every observation, all while confronting the frustrating silence of absence. Their meticulous work produced exhaustive records, photographs, and maps, yet still left the heart of the mystery unresolved. The quiet, cumulative tension, the disciplined routines of search, intertwined with the eerie, unexplained disappearance, creates the sense of understated horror that defines historical Bermuda Triangle events. And so, the Stardust case leaves us reflecting on a simple, unnerving truth. Even with careful planning, skill, and observation, ordinary human efforts can collide with natural and mysterious forces in ways that erase both expectation and evidence. As the search teams returned empty-handed and the families waited in quiet dread, one could not help but wonder what subtle combination of wind, altitude, and human error allowed the Stardust to vanish so completely, and how many other journeys have ended in similar silent disappearance, forever unrecorded. Decades passed after the Stardust vanished in 1947, leaving behind only fragmented transmissions, scattered eyewitness accounts, and the meticulous yet ultimately inconclusive records of airline officials and search teams. Families held onto hope, clinging to the faint, cryptic, stendic message, interpreting its repetition in countless ways. Aviation historians debated the disappearance, adding it to a growing list of unexplained incidents reminiscent of the Bermuda Triangle's earlier maritime vanishing. Each retelling emphasized the ordinary routines aboard the flight: passengers reading quietly, crew monitoring instruments, engines humming steadily, all the hallmarks of mundane air travel, now tinged with an eerie significance because the plane never arrived. It was not until 2000, more than 50 years later, that the mystery partially resolved. Pieces of fuselage, wing sections, and personal belongings emerged gradually as the ice slowly melted. Each fragment was carefully catalogued, photographed, and eventually transported for analysis. Among the recovered items were the remains of luggage, metal instruments, and parts of the aircraft's structure that bore the marks of collision with terrain. While these discoveries confirm that the plane had not disappeared entirely into some unknowable void, the details of its fate remained both sobering and quietly unsettling. Investigators analyzed the wreckage and cross-referenced it with weather reports, pilot records, and known flight paths. They concluded that the Stardust likely collided with a mountain at high altitude, an event now referred to in aviation as controlled flight into terrain. Atmospheric conditions, including rapidly shifting winds, thick clouds, and possibly optical illusions caused by snow-covered peaks, had misled the pilots into believing they were at a safer altitude than reality indicated. Navigational instruments of the era, though state-of-the-art for the 1940s, were insufficient to prevent such a misjudgment under unusual conditions. The explanation, while scientifically plausible, could not erase the profound eeriness of the decades-long absence. The Stardust had lingered in memory, rumor, and incomplete records, a ghostly presence in the annals of aviation history. Even with this partial resolution, the mysterious radio transmission stendic remained a puzzle. Various explanations have been proposed over the years: an abbreviation of scent deck, a miscommunication in Morse code, or a momentary verbal error by a pilot attempting to signal a status report. None of these explanations is entirely satisfying, particularly considering the calm, procedural tone in which the rest of the flight's records were maintained. The repetition of this word became emblematic of the entire incident, a subtle, inexplicable anomaly embedded within a thoroughly documented routine, echoing the understated horror found in earlier maritime disappearances of the Bermuda Triangle. The discovery of the stardust debris also shed light on the broader historical patterns of vanishings in this region. Like the countless ships lost centuries before, the aircraft's disappearance highlighted the intersection of ordinary human activity with extraordinary natural conditions. Just as sailors of the 18th and 19th centuries performed routine maintenance, navigation, and observation, the crew of the Stardust conducted its duties with precision and discipline. Yet the ordinary order of their lives collided with a hidden combination of topography, atmospheric phenomena, and technological limitations, resulting in sudden disappearance. The parallel is striking. The quiet horror is not loud or violent, but exists in the tension between meticulous routine and the ocean or mountains, indifferent, immutable forces. Passengers had embarked on a standard journey, unaware that subtle miscalculations and natural phenomena could erase their presence almost entirely. Crew members executed their duties with the skill and care required of their profession, yet their efforts could not prevent the eventual collision. The quiet courage, the patience, and the diligence of these ordinary people stand in contrast to the extraordinary event that overtook them. In the absence of dramatic explosions or fiery spectacle, the understated narrative becomes all the more poignant. The horror lies in the ordinary routines of life, meeting forces beyond human comprehension. Furthermore, the Stardust incident underscores the enduring allure of unexplained phenomena within historical memory. Even when partial resolution is achieved, ambiguity remains. What caused the optical illusions or misread altitudes? Why did the radio transmission produce such an unusual, indecipherable word? How many other flights, like countless ships before them, were lost to similar hidden hazards? These questions are left unresolved, echoing the quiet unease that permeates historical records of the Bermuda Triangle. The interplay of meticulous documentation and lingering mystery creates a sustained tensiona form of horror, rooted not in spectacle, but in absence and uncertainty. Historians have also noted the cultural impact of the Stardust disappearance. The incident became a cautionary tale among pilots, reinforcing the importance of understanding mountainous terrain, atmospheric phenomena, and the limitations of early navigation. Discussions of the case appear in aviation manuals, training programs, and safety protocols, often presented with calm, factual language. Yet, beneath the technical lessons lies a quieter resonance, a reminder that the everyday work of humans, when intersecting with subtle natural forces, can lead to outcomes that are profoundly beyond expectation. In this sense, the Stardust continues the lineage of Bermuda Triangle disappearances, connecting early maritime mysteries to modern aerial enigmas. Even with the debris recovered, the psychological weight of the decades-long absence cannot be understated. Functioning yet human beings vanished for over 50 years, leaving behind only a whisper in the form of logs, transmissions, and scattered memories. This form of understated horror, the accumulation of ordinary events ending in extraordinary absences, characteristic of the historical narrative of the Bermuda Triangle. And so, as you consider the Stardust, its passengers, and its crew, you are left with a reflection on the delicate balance between human effort and the environment in which we operate. The mountains concealed the plane, its cargo, and its people for decades, offering only fragmented clues and faint echoes to those seeking to understand. The Stardust is both resolved and unresolved. We know its fate, yet we remain haunted by the quiet, procedural, and persistent questions that centuries of vanishings in the Bermuda Triangle continue to pose. As we close this story, the lingering question remains: what subtle forces, geographical, atmospheric, or otherwise, remain undiscovered in the vast, quiet expanse between ocean, mountain, and sky, waiting to intersect with ordinary human lives in ways we may never fully understand? Story 3. The Vanishing of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, during the height of World War I, the massive collier ship USS Cyclops departed from Barbados bound for Baltimore, Maryland, carrying a cargo of manganese ore, a routine voyage designed to supply essential materials for the war effort. The Cyclops was the pride of the U.S. Navy's auxiliary fleet, one of the largest non-combatant ships ever built at that time. With advanced engines, substantial cargo capacity, and an experienced crew under the command of Captain George W. Worley, on paper, everything about the voyage was ordinary, calculated, and methodical. The ship was inspected, the cargo secured, and all navigational charts carefully reviewed. Crew and officers alike settled into the familiar rhythm of long-distance maritime travel, the hum of engines, the clatter of deck rigging, and the quiet attentiveness required for maintaining a vessel across the unpredictable Atlantic. Yet, unlike routine journeys of the era, the USS Cyclops would never reach its destination. After leaving Barbados on March 4th, the ship maintained scheduled radio contact, providing brief updates on weather and position. Initial communications suggested nothing out of the ordinary: calm seas, steady progress, and routine navigation reports. By March 8th, however, the Cyclops failed to respond to radio queries from nearby ships. Subsequent attempts to locate her proved fruitless. No distress signal was ever recorded. No debris washed ashore, and no survivors were found. The entire crew of 309 experienced sailors, officers, and passengers traveling with them vanished without trace. In the annals of the U.S. Navy, the disappearance of the Cyclops remains one of the largest non-combat losses in history, a quiet and enduring enigma. The historical record offers meticulous, almost bureaucratic accounts of the vessel's last known moments. Logs and reports catalog the expected routine: check-ins, weather updates, fuel consumption, and estimated course corrections. Yet, the abrupt cessation of these ordinary entries is what makes the story profoundly unsettling. Unlike the drama of storms or explosions, the Cyclops' disappearance is defined by procedural normalcy, interrupted by silence. The crew performed every duty as expected. The engines functioned. Navigation proceeded according to plan. And then nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no explanation. The quiet, methodical nature of the disappearance echoes countless vanished vessels in the Bermuda Triangle's history. a continuum of understated horror where ordinary human effort meets forces beyond comprehension. Several factors may have contributed to the mystery, yet none are conclusive. The Cyclops was heavily laden with manganese, or a dense cargo that could have affected the ship's stability. Some historians suggest that a sudden storm could have overwhelmed the vessel, tipping it into the ocean without time to transmit a distress signal. Others speculate about structural weaknesses, human error, or navigational miscalculations. Submarine activity in the Atlantic during wartime has also been proposed as a possible explanation, though no evidence of enemy engagement was ever found. Each theory provides a fragmentary lens through which to understand the event, yet none fully resolves the disappearance. The absence of tangible evidence, no wreckage, no survivors, no first-hand accounts ensures that the Cyclops' fate remains quietly perplexing, a ghostly echo in naval history. The disappearance of the Cyclops also reveals much about the ordinary routines of seafaring life. During the early 20th century, crew members followed schedules, monitored machinery, and observed the sea with the disciplined focus taught by years of training. Passengers on board, often minor military officials or civilians, traveling for logistical purposes, conducted their routines quietly, reading, writing letters, or observing the horizon. Even amidst the growing threat of submarine warfare, the day-to-day life aboard the Cyclops was meticulously ordered. The contrast between this disciplined normalcy and the sudden erasure of the ship and its crew is what creates the enduring eeriness of the event. Unlike cinematic depictions of disaster, the real horror lies in procedural absence, the meticulous records of ordinary life, interrupted by total disappearance. As decades passed, numerous searches were conducted, spanning the Atlantic from the eastern Caribbean to the waters off the U.S. East Coast. Naval vessels, private expeditions, and later historical researchers scoured the ocean floor, studying sonar readings, ocean currents, and maritime charts. While pieces of shipwrecks in the broader region were discovered over the years, none could be definitively identified as the Cyclops. The possibility that it lies buried beneath shifting sands, hidden in deep underwater canyons, or scattered in small fragments across the ocean's expanse keeps the story alive. Each new theory adds a layer of curiosity, yet the fundamental mystery remains: a massive ship, fully operational, vanishing without a trace in an era when radio communication should have provided some record of its fate. Human perception and interpretation play a subtle role in this enduring mystery. For sailors, historians, and casual observers alike, the Cyclops serves as a case study in the limits of knowledge and control over one's environment. The routine, structured lives of the crew and passengers contrasted starkly with the unpredictability of the Atlantic. Weather, currents, and unseen underwater formations, ordinary, natural forces, combined in a way that erased one of the largest ships of its time. The quiet, bureaucratic records, with their clinical attention to fuel logs and positional updates, leave behind a strange resonance, a reminder that disappearance does not always come with spectacle, that the extraordinary can manifest in the quietest of ways. In reflecting on the USS Cyclops, it becomes evident that the quiet horror of the Bermuda Triangle is as much about human perception as about the environment. Ordinary routines, meticulous attention to duty, and disciplined observation are no guarantee against inexplicable outcomes. Ships and aircraft may vanish despite careful preparation, leaving behind only sparse, bureaucratic traces of their last known activity. The Cyclops is emblematic of this phenomenon. A vessel so large, a crew so experienced, yet a disappearance so complete that it continues to baffle naval historians, aviation enthusiasts, and curious observers more than a century later. And so the tale of the USS Cyclops leaves us with a lingering thought, one that echoes the themes of all historical vanishings in the Bermuda Triangle. What subtle, hidden combinations of natural forces, human decisions, and chance events can intersect to erase lives and vessels, completely leaving behind only meticulous records and unanswered questions for the generations that follow.